We will now take a leap across the big pond. And for that, I'd like to invite, bye-bye, thank you. I'd like to invite Daniel Doolittle. Hello, Daniel, to join me on stage. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm all right. Shall we sit down so I can sit down as well? Yeah. I'm going to sit here. Thank you. So, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. I've got some water. Thank you for joining me here today. You've come from far away. And we were actually expecting a second speaker from a US company, but it seems the topic is a bit touchy. He cancelled his participation at the last moment.
And I'm going to make sure that I talk to Andy about that. I'll express everyone's
I was not going
thoughts.
to name any names, but there we go.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everyone. And thank you to everyone in the audience who are sticking around to hear some weird individual's thoughts on U.S. offshore wind.
Exactly. Can you hold the microphone really close?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. So you're a principal offshore wind at US consultancy Integral.
Correct.
Correct. I got that one right.
Okay.
Now, when we look at the US right now, it's a bit of a mixed picture, right? You have, on the one hand, Empire Wind that was stopped, that then resumed construction. Developers are withdrawing from the market. EDF has just cancelled its offshore wind farm, Atlantic Shores. Meanwhile, as we said over the phone, US Wind got this really important air quality permit for one of their projects. So can you help us make sense of this all?
I can try. And I think it's important to point out that the news at 11, news organizations are biased, and that's absolutely the case here as well. So just one small correction, EDF has actually not canceled Atlantic Shores. It was reported that way in the press.
All right.
So it is a completely viable project. Its contracts are in place. Its project name is Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind. Who knows what the future will hold for them, but it was not quite properly reported in the press. They're looking for the headline. They're looking for this idea that wind is dying, Trump has killed offshore wind. And as you alluded to in those questions, that's not the case. Has the Trump administration impacted offshore wind forecasting? Impacted offshore wind contracting, impacted offshore wind planning, 100%. You know, there's so much uncertainty in the marketplace right now. There's so much uncertainty in the news sphere right now. So it's no surprise that representatives of these industries that have fiduciary responsibilities are starting to say, wait a second, what are we doing here? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? And teasing those apart is basically my day job. That's what I've been trying to figure out. So EDF, Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind, is still viable. You know, they're not going to break ground tomorrow, but
it's on pause.
It's on pause.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, I may have to go to my notes here, but there's actually, I think, 5 offshore wind projects in the United States, mostly on the Atlantic side, that are under construction right now.
Right.
There's 3 that are operating right now. Mm-hmm. They're not big numbers in terms of megawatt hours, but if the 5 that are under construction come to fruition in the next 2 to 3 years, there's going to be, let me check notes. There will be almost 5.5 gigawatts
that will come
completed.
online.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's only 175 megawatts in operation right now. But like I said, Dominion, which is going to be 2.6 gigawatts, Empire Wind, Vineyard Wind, Revolution Wind, Sunrise Wind, those are all in construction right now, and they're actively being built.
Right.
So.
Talking about silver lining, there's also this other silver lining. The case brought forward by 18 states against the Trump administration's executive order to stop offshore wind development until further review. Can you give us the latest on that?
I can, and that changes daily. I was just checking in on the court docket this morning, and we may have news. A ruling may be coming out tomorrow.
Oh.
So
maybe you can come back onto the stage tomorrow.
You'll see me celebrating if that's the case. I think an important point of that lawsuit is that it was put together by 17 attorneys general of a nice mix of states. It wasn't just Democratic states. It was actually quite a number of Republican states, Republican-led states, because they're recognizing the massive economic benefits that have been arrived to their states from offshore wind. That's everything from shipbuilding, from steel plants, from wire factories, to job skills, training centers, port and harbor development. Jean Remy's comments on the earlier panel, I think, were absolutely spot on. Where these port and harbors represent massive investment opportunities, not just for offshore wind, but for all kinds of maritime industries.
So there's no definite decision on that one yet?
There is no definite decision. It was, the complaint was filed, I think, back in March. I'm sorry, no, I'm losing track of months. It was filed in May, 5th of May. And it was amended. The complaint was amended June 10th, so just a few days ago, because there were early signals that the courts might actually agree with the federal government. So the attorneys general modified their complaint somewhat, and
right.
that went in yesterday. That went in, I'm sorry, on the 11th, and the judge decided to postpone the hearing or the final judgment until June 18th. So it's been evolving fast, but there's an interesting backstory there. Is that there was a trade organization that was ready to launch that lawsuit against the executive order within the first week of Trump signing Trump signing the executive order in question, and just for a number of delays, a number of reasons, that trade organization wasn't able to file the suit. So it took some time for the attorneys generals to pick it up, which they did. But you have to think, had that been filed a little sooner, would Empire Wind have even experienced the cessation order that it had to suffer with for a few months, at the tune of, I think they were burning $50 million a week just in that delay. So it was a pretty unnecessary cessation. So
you also said, when we were talking before this conference, that it looks like everything might be going downhill, but you can't just stop a sector that's been in the making, that's been moving forward for years or decades, right? The infrastructure investment is continuing, the efforts are continuing in the US.
Yeah, I would say that, this is not the first time that the United States has tried to develop offshore wind. It's also not the first time that it's been thwarted or met with a lot of resistance. In the early 2000s, there was a project in Rhode Island, Massachusetts waters called Cape Wind that was effectively stalled and delayed in the court system for a while. Then, I'd say around 2014, 2015, we started seeing the current generation of offshore wind development occur. It started in Rhode Island, with the Block Island Block Island wind farm, and since 2015, there's been what anybody would argue has been a massive investment into the United States markets, and there's reasonably good reasons for that. The demand of major population centers like New York, Boston, Washington, D.C. area, Los Angeles. There's a lot of power demand. You also look at, the fact that we have the United States has a large number of AI-based data centers, and that's been growing like mad. So the demand for energy is absolutely a reasonable market that has justified such incredible investments. But you're absolutely right. We've had about $45 billion worth of investment so far to date, and just to watch all of that diminish or evaporate into thin air, I don't really foresee that happening.
And so what kind of projects are continuing? I mean, is it ports, infrastructure, factories?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a diversity of projects continue. The states are working strongly to keep their momentum going. So California is developing and still investing in quite a bit of the port developments. Virginia has just recently announced a $200 million cable manufacturing plant go in. New England states are still investing in ports as well. So anything that's kind of a little bit removed from federal judicial or federal oversight, that still keeps going. And then, of course, there's the 5 projects in federal waters that we mentioned earlier that are still developing.
So would you say that this moment, which is obviously very difficult for the sector and for citizens, lots of citizens in the US, would you say this is maybe also a business and economic opportunity for investors?
It absolutely, I think, is an opportunity for patient capital. For capital that's willing to wait, maybe 2 years, maybe, see what the midterm elections do, see if there's an administrative change. It may be a shorter wait, in the case if we're seeing the Trump administration change its mind a little bit. Like you look at the numbers of what the demand is going to be for AI, AI data centers, AI electrical demand. I don't see how we're going to effectively meet that demand if we're not turning on every power source we can, power generation source. And so maybe the argument is changing. Maybe it's not a response to climate change that the U.S. offshore wind market is going to continue. Maybe it's just an electrical demand narrative that is promoting the next few years of offshore wind growth that we see.
Pragmatism.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So would you say that this is something, I mean, we're still really in early days. Donald Trump has just come back to the White House. But would you say this realization is kind of sinking in or starting to sink in already?
Clarify that a little bit.
Do you think that the government, that we might be close to a turning point where the government suddenly says, well, we're actually against offshore wind, but you can continue, and we continue to support you because we need that electricity. Are they aware of the fact that they might really need it in the beginning, in the future?
Speaking just for my own opinion, that's a really difficult question to answer. Like, what would a rational person would look at the energy demand and say this, they would look at the previous investment, they would look at the demand, they would look at the opportunity, and they would say, oh yeah, this is worth investing in. And it's interesting, your earlier question about is this a market opportunity, I wanted to also mention that there are probably 3 or 4 different tranches of projects that are in various stages of development. And, I would look at projects that, I'm thinking of Invenergy, for example. They're the only fully US-based developer, and they have 4 leases, 2 in the Gulf of Maine, 1 on the Atlantic East Coast, leading light wind, and 1 on the West Coast off of Southern California. And the Southern California one is floating wind. That's going to be the way that's going to have to be developed. That's 3, 4, 5, 8 years away. The Gulf of Maine were the last 2 leases, or the last 4 leases that the Biden administration was able to award. So those are going to take some time. And then the Leading Light Wind lease, for example, it has a power takeoff contract, but they've started their site characterization surveys, but they're still a ways off from construction. So that timing for that company might just coincide with some of these other macro political events that are taking place, and they could find themselves with quite a bit more extra market share because all of these other developers have paused or canceled or left the market. So I think there is opportunity that people are looking at with an optimistic perspective. Yeah.
And talking about changes, can we talk about tariffs, about steel tariffs? Is that having are these tariffs that have been announced by Donald Trump, are they having any impact on the industry?
Of course they are, but it's a planning impact. And will the tariffs last? Exactly.
Don't ask me.
Past performance would indicate that the tariffs are a tool that the administration is using, or the threat of tariffs, or the permanency of tariffs don't seem to be set in stone right now. So, but yes, to your question, Empire Wind is a great example. They were relieved to get the stop work order removed, but they're also projecting that if the steel tariffs come in as they're being projected that they will be, that could add another $200 million to their investment cost. So, like on top of the expense that they've already incurred due to that stop work order, they say they're committed to finishing it, but they've also said that budget that has been burned for Empire Wind may severely impact what they look for in the rest of the U.S. market. So a chilling effect, of course, tariffs will have a chilling effect.
Can I just ask you about that business opportunity part? You are a consultant. Have you had many investors from around the world suddenly contacting you saying, we need to invest in the US market now?
I sign a lot of NDAs.
Okay.
So I'm going to say that we're very positive on our business and where we see opportunities, but I'm not going to speak too broadly on that.
Okay. Anything you'd like to add on a positive note, maybe looking ahead?
I will say that I started my exposure to offshore wind in the Netherlands probably in 2011, 2012, and I've always felt like the United States, this most recent 10-year development cycle, was where Europe was at that 2011, 2012 timeframe. And it's just such a pleasure to be here and to see what the European trajectory has been, and that it's such a developed industry. The stands, the people, the questions, the conversations, they give me hope. They give me hope that the United States will be able to catch up and be having a lot of those same assumptions based on existing projects and existing portfolios that have been successfully invested in and contracted. So yeah, there's reason to hope.
Well, let's cross fingers for positive change in the future. Thank you very much, Daniel Doolittle, for taking the time in these difficult times.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and a huge thanks to the gallery as well. This was today's last panel. I also want to say hello again to Emmanuel and Elizabeth, our wonderful translators who've been translating simultaneously over there all that was being said on the stage. This is, as I said, the end of day one of our panels, but it's not the end just yet. There's a party tonight, the SEANERGY party at the hall Bill Toki. You can walk there, it takes about 40 minutes, or you can take a bus. I'll see you there, or I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you.